American farms decreased from 2.6 million in 2019 to 2.0 million today. By 2040, traditional farming will be extinct, replaced by laboratory-grown meat, controlled by the same corporations dominating pharmaceuticals, technology, and finance. This isn't market evolution. This is coordinated assault on food independence designed to transform nutrition from a basic right into proprietary technology controlled by patent-holding corporations. Control the protein supply, control population survival. Make protein dependent on corporate laboratories, make human life dependent on corporate cooperation. Traditional farmers are being bankrupted through regulatory pressure and economic warfare. Their land is acquired by investment firms. Traditional livestock is replaced by laboratory systems requiring proprietary technology and corporate supply chains. 20 years, eating natural meat will be like owning a horse, technically possible, but economically impossible. Lab-grown protein will be cheaper, subsidized, and mandated. Traditional farming will be expensive, regulated, and illegal. Corporations controlling lab-grown protein will control who eats and who starves, what nutrition is available and what is restricted. The regulatory assault making traditional farming impossible. The attack on traditional farming began with environmental regulations that sound reasonable until you understand their actual implementation. Climate change policies, nitrogen restrictions, water usage limits, and animal welfare standards aren't designed to protect the environment. They redesigned to make small-scale farming economically impossible while exempting large corporations that can afford compliance costs. The Netherlands model, beta test for global implementation. Dutch farmers are being forced off land through nitrogen emission restrictions that make livestock farming illegal. The restrictions don't apply to airports or industry-only family farms operating sustainably for generations. Farmers exceeding nitrogen limits must reduce livestock by 95%, relocate, or sell to government. Most sell because other options make farming unprofitable. The farmland isn't protected as open space, it's sold to technology corporations developing laboratory-grown meat facilities, solar installations, and data centers. Traditional farms feeding millions become synthetic protein labs. The water rights weapon. Western states restrict agricultural water while maintaining unlimited access for technology companies. California's Central Valley produces 25% of America's food, but faces continuous restrictions forcing farmers to sell to developers and tech companies. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon build data centers consuming millions of gallons daily, while ranchers lose water rights for generations of family ownership. The carbon credit scam. Carbon credit systems create artificial scarcity that makes traditional agriculture unprofitable while subsidizing laboratory alternatives. Livestock farming is declared carbon intensive while laboratory meat production is classified as carbon neutral or carbon negative. But the carbon calculations ignore the energy required for laboratory meat production, the electricity for bioreactors, the transportation of growth media, the refrigeration systems, the waste processing. Laboratory meat production actually generates more carbon emissions than grass-fed cattle. But accounting tricks hide the true environmental cost. Meanwhile, traditional farmers are forced to purchase carbon credits to offset their supposed emissions, while laboratory meat producers receive carbon credits for displacing traditional agriculture. The system transfers money from farmers to laboratories while claiming environmental benefits. Corporate carbon credit trading creates a mechanism where Bill Gates, who owns 270,000 acres of farmland, can profit from carbon credits generated by converting agricultural land to solar installations while investing in laboratory meat companies that benefit from traditional agriculture elimination. Sponsorlandgrappas farms. The elimination of traditional farming enables the largest land acquisition in American history. But the buyers aren't other farmers. They're investment firms, technology corporations, and billionaires building infrastructure for controlled food production. Bill Gates, America's largest farmland owner. Gates owns 270,000 acres. But isn't farming here converting land to solar installations and experimental facilities for synthetic agriculture? Purchases target productive land near water sources, terminating farming leases for technology development. The land tests synthetic biology, laboratory meat scaling, and automated farming, while Gates invests in lab meat companies that benefit from traditional agriculture elimination. BlackRock, an investment firm. Agriculture investment firms purchase farmland above market prices for infrastructure development, not agriculture. Land converts to facilities supporting lab-grown food. Bioreactor manufacturing, growth media production, processing networks. Traditional farmers cannot compete against firms buying land for non-agricultural purposes at prices exceeding agricultural profit potential. Foreign corporate control. Chinese corporations, Middle Eastern sovereign funds, and European chemical companies are purchasing American farmland through shell companies and investment vehicles that obscure foreign ownership. The foreign purchases target strategically important agricultural areas, water-rich regions, transportation hubs, and processing facilities. The goal isn't food production for American consumption, but control over food production infrastructure. Smithfield Foods, America's largest pork producer, is owned by Chinese corporation WH Group. Syngenta, which controls much of America's seed supply, is owned by Chinese corporation ChemChina. Foreign ownership of American food production creates dependency relationships that can be weaponized during conflicts or economic disputes. But the most sophisticated foreign control operates through technology licensing. Laboratory-grown meat production requires specialized equipment, growth media, and biological processes that are controlled by patents held by European and Chinese corporations. The technology trap. Why lab-grown meat creates permanent dependency. Laboratory-grown meat isn't just an alternative to traditional farming, it's a technology that creates permanent dependency relationships between food producers and technology corporations. Unlike traditional farming, which uses freely available natural processes, laboratory meat requires proprietary technology, patented biological processes, and corporate supply chains that can be controlled or discontinued at will. The bioreactor dependency. Laboratory meat requires bioreactors costing $500,000 to $1 million per unit, with proprietary technology controlled by few manufacturers. Unlike farming tools that can be owned and repaired independently, bioreactors require corporate service contracts, software updates, and authorization codes. The dependency prevents independent production through equipment that cannot be reverse engineered or operated without corporate authorization. The growth media monopoly. Laboratory meat requires nutrient solutions produced by three companies: Merck, Thermo Fisher Scientific, and Sartorius. Growth media uses proprietary formulations protected by patents requiring specialized chemicals, only available through pharmaceutical supply chains. Independent producers cannot develop alternatives due to patent protection and pharmaceutical company control over underlying chemical supplies. The genetic engineering trap. Laboratory-grown meat requires genetically modified cell lines that are protected by intellectual property laws and biological patents. The cell lines are licensed from biotechnology companies that can control usage, modify licensing terms, and terminate access to the biological materials. Traditional livestock breeds are not protected by patents and can be bred independently. Laboratory meat cell lines are corporate property that must be licensed continuously to maintain production authorization. The genetic engineering also requires continuous research and development to prevent cell line degradation, improve production efficiency, and develop new products. This research is conducted by the same corporations that own the patents, creating permanent dependency relationships. Cell line licensing creates subscription models for food production, where meat producers must pay ongoing royalties to biotechnology companies for access to the genetic materials required for production. The regulatory capture. Food safety regulations for laboratory-grown meat are being written by the same corporations that produce the technology. The regulatory frameworks create barriers to entry that prevent competition while protecting existing patent holders. Laboratory meat regulations require extensive safety testing, quality control systems, and manufacturing standards that cost millions of dollars to implement. These requirements are designed to prevent independent producers from entering the market while exempting established corporations through grandfather clauses and regulatory fast-tracking. The regulations also create ongoing compliance costs that make small-scale production economically impossible while providing competitive advantages to corporations that can spread regulatory costs across large production facilities. Traditional farmers face increasing regulations that make their operations more expensive, while laboratory meat producers receive regulatory protection that makes their operations more profitable. The investment network, who controls synthetic food, the same financial networks that control pharmaceuticals, technology, and energy are positioning to control laboratory-grown food production. The companies developing synthetic meat are funded by the same investment firms that profit from traditional agriculture elimination. The big tech convergence. Google, Microsoft, Amazon invest in laboratory meat because synthetic food requires the same infrastructure as data centers. Massive electricity, cooling systems, automated control, real-time monitoring. Amazon's lab meat investments integrate with logistics networks, creating controlled distribution that monitors consumption, restricts alternative foods, and manipulates nutritional availability. The pharmaceutical integration. Pharmaceutical companies control laboratory meat because the processes are pharmaceutical manufacturing adapted for food. Merck, Pfizer, Novartis leverage existing regulatory relationships and biological expertise. Pharmaceutical food control enables nutritional manipulation, addictive substances, and population control through dietary modification. Laboratory meat can include pharmaceuticals, behavior-modifying substances, or dependencies creating biological control. The financial control network. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, the three largest asset managers, control investments in traditional agriculture, laboratory, meat companies, biotechnology firms, and pharmaceutical corporations simultaneously. These firms profit from traditional agriculture elimination while profiting from synthetic food development. They can coordinate investments to accelerate the transition while maximizing returns from both the destruction of traditional systems and the creation of replacement technologies. The asset managers also control pension funds, retirement accounts, and university endowments that provide investment capital for synthetic food development, while the account holders remain unaware that their savings are funding the elimination of food independence. Investment firm control creates unified strategies across multiple industries that appear competitive but actually coordinate to achieve synthetic food market domination. The international coordination, global food control. The elimination of traditional farming and replacement with laboratory systems is happening globally through coordinated policies implemented by international organizations, government agreements, and corporate partnerships that transcend national boundaries. The United Nations Agenda, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, provide international justification for traditional agriculture elimination through environmental protection claims. Goal to Zero Hunger and Goal 13 Climate Action are used to justify policies that eliminate traditional farming while promoting technological alternatives. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization promotes laboratory-grown meat as necessary for feeding global populations while reducing environmental impact. But FAO studies ignore the environmental costs of laboratory meat production while exaggerating the environmental impact of traditional agriculture. UN policies provide international legal frameworks that enable national governments to implement agriculture elimination policies while claiming compliance with international environmental agreements. The UN also coordinates technology transfer programs that provide laboratory meat technology to developing countries while preventing traditional agriculture development, creating global dependency on corporate food production systems. The World Economic Forum's strategy. The World Economic Forum's Great Reset agenda explicitly includes transforming food systems from traditional agriculture to technological alternatives. WEF publications promote laboratory meat, insect protein, and synthetic foods as inevitable replacements for traditional nutrition sources. WEF partnerships with major corporations coordinate global implementation strategies that align government policies, corporate investments, and international agreements to accelerate food system transformation. The WEF also promotes precision nutrition programs that would customize individual diets based on genetic information, health monitoring, and behavioral analysis systems that require synthetic food production to provide the control and customization that traditional foods can not achieve. WEF global governance frameworks position laboratory food control as necessary for addressing climate change, population growth, and resource scarcity while ignoring alternatives that would preserve food independence. The corporate treaty system. International trade agreements increasingly include provisions that protect laboratory meat technology while restricting traditional agriculture trade, patent protection, intellectual property enforcement, and technology transfer requirements create legal frameworks that favor synthetic food systems. The Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTPP) includes biological patent protections that prevent member countries from developing independent laboratory meat technology while protecting corporate intellectual property rights that prevent member countries from developing independent laboratory meat technology while protecting corporate intellectual property rights. Trade agreements also include regulatory harmonization requirements that force countries to adopt food safety standards written by the corporations, developing laboratory meat technology, creating global regulatory capture that prevents competition. Corporate treaty systems operate outside democratic governance while creating international legal obligations that prevent countries from protecting food independence or developing alternative systems. The resistance. Why traditional farming is fighting back. Despite coordinated pressure from corporations, governments, and international organizations, traditional farmers are organizing resistance movements that understand the stakes of the synthetic food transformation. But the resistance faces overwhelming resource disadvantages and sophisticated opposition strategies. The Dutch farmer uprising. Dutch farmers have organized the most visible resistance to traditional agriculture elimination through mass protests, political organization, and direct action that disrupts government operations and corporate supply chains. Farmer protests have blocked highways, surrounded government buildings, and disrupted airport operations to demonstrate the economic and political power of traditional agriculture. The protests have forced government negotiations and delayed implementation of nitrogen restrictions. But the Dutch government has responded with increased police enforcement, surveillance of farmer organizations, and accelerated land acquisition programs that bypass political resistance through economic pressure. The Dutch farmer resistance provides a model for global farmer organization while demonstrating the limitations of political action against coordinated corporate and government opposition. The American ranch defense. American ranchers in Western states are using legal challenges, political lobbying, and economic organization to resist water rights restrictions, land regulations, and carbon credit requirements that threaten traditional livestock production. Ranch defense organizations are also developing alternative supply chains, direct marketing systems, and cooperative ownership models that reduce dependence on corporate processing and distribution systems controlled by laboratory meat investors. But rancher resistance faces resource limitations, legal costs, and political isolation that makes sustained opposition difficult against well-funded corporate and government pressure. American ranch defense also faces internal divisions between large agribusiness operations that can profit from synthetic food transformation and small family operations that face elimination. The International Pharma Alliance pharma organizations in Canada, Australia, Germany, and other countries are coordinating resistance strategies that share information, coordinate political action, and develop alternative systems that preserve traditional agriculture independence. International pharma cooperation provides resources, expertise, and political support that individual national movements cannot achieve alone. Coordinated action also creates economic pressure through synchronized protests and supply chain disruptions. But international farmer alliances face surveillance, infiltration, and disruption by intelligence agencies and corporate security forces that have extensive experience undermining political organization. Government and corporate opposition to farmer resistance includes financial manipulation, media campaigns, and legal harassment designed to destroy farmer organization and individual resistance leaders. The health deception: what lab-grown meat really does to your body. Laboratory-grown meat is promoted as identical to traditional meat. But the biological processes used to create synthetic protein produce fundamentally different nutritional profiles, chemical compositions, and health effects that are being hidden from consumers through regulatory manipulation and corporate-funded research. The cellular difference: laboratory meat uses immortalized cell lines, genetically modified cells reproducing indefinitely rather than following natural aging. These are essentially controlled cancer cells prevented from forming tumors through chemical inhibitors. Traditional meat comes from healthy tissue following natural processes. Laboratory meat comes from abnormal cellular development requiring pharmaceutical intervention. Long-term health effects are unknown because comprehensive safety studies haven't been conducted. The chemical contamination: laboratory meat production requires growth media containing antibiotics, hormones, growth factors, and chemical additives that remain in the final product despite processing claims. These chemicals are necessary to prevent bacterial contamination and promote cellular growth in laboratory conditions. Traditional meat from properly raised animals contains no pharmaceutical additives and follows natural biological development processes that produce nutritionally complete protein without chemical intervention. Laboratory meat also requires preservatives, stabilizers, and processing aids that extend shelf life and improve texture, but create chemical exposure that traditional meat does not require. The cumulative health effects of consuming laboratory-produced chemicals include antibiotic resistance, hormonal disruption, and toxicity that may not become apparent until widespread consumption creates population-level health problems. The nutritional deficiency: laboratory-grown meat lacks the nutritional complexity of traditional meat because synthetic production cannot replicate the biological processes that create complete nutrition in naturally developed animal tissue. Traditional meat contains vitamin B12, iron, zinc, and other nutrients in bioavailable forms that are difficult or impossible to replicate through laboratory processes. Laboratory meat requires synthetic vitamin fortification to approximate traditional meat nutrition. Laboratory meat also lacks the fat composition, amino acid profiles, and trace nutrients that result from natural animal development processes that cannot be replicated in bioreactor environments. Nutritional deficiencies from laboratory meat consumption may create dependency on vitamin supplements, pharmaceutical interventions, and nutritional additives that generate profits for the same corporations producing synthetic meat. The addiction potential: laboratory meat can be engineered to include flavor enhancers, chemical additives, and biological modifications that create craving and dependency responses similar to processed foods and pharmaceutical products. Unlike traditional meat, which cannot be modified beyond natural variation, laboratory meat provides opportunities for chemical manipulation of taste, texture, and biological response that can create psychological and physiological dependency. Food addiction engineering includes salt levels, fat compositions, and flavor profiles specifically designed to trigger overconsumption and repeat purchasing behavior that maximizes corporate profits while compromising consumer health. Laboratory meat addiction potential enables population control through dietary dependency while generating continuous revenue streams from consumers who cannot easily switch to alternative protein sources. The timeline when natural meat becomes impossible: 2024 to 2027. Environmental regulations accelerate targeting livestock. Laboratory meat receives fast tracking and subsidies, creating artificial price advantages. 2027 to 2030, lab meat achieves cost parity through scale and regulatory pressure. Traditional meat becomes luxury product for wealthy, while synthetic becomes standard. 2030 to 2035, traditional processing infrastructure replaced by synthetic facilities. Rural agricultural communities face economic collapse. 2035 to 2040, traditional livestock becomes illegal through animal welfare and environmental laws. Natural meat limited to hunting and black market sources. The choice before us, the synthetic food transformation, represents a choice between human independence and corporate control. Accept laboratory nutrition controlled by patents and corporations, or preserve traditional food production, enabling independent nutrition. The choice must be made soon. Once traditional infrastructure is eliminated, rebuilding becomes impossible. Once synthetic systems achieve dominance, alternatives become illegal. Individual actions: support traditional farmers through direct purchases, avoid laboratory meat products, develop food production skills and community relationships. Political resistance: support candidates protecting traditional agriculture. Oppose legislation restricting farming or promoting laboratory meat. Traditional agriculture has fed humanity for thousands of years. Laboratory meat has existed less than a decade. The choice between proven natural systems and experimental corporate alternatives should be obvious. Your food independence depends on it. The time to choose is now.